We understand. We understand. Labour signed the Climate Change Act of 2022 when they last got into office. Huge. Where the fuck did it go? I heard it. Where did it go? Labour signed the Climate Change Act of 2022, which signs into, which pledges to reach 43% climate reduction targets by 2030 and net zero by 2050. That's what we've signed in. Net zero by 2050 and 43% reductions by 2030. So 5 years to reach 43% reductions. We understand that emissions are energy production, industry emissions, fugitive emissions, agricultural emissions, like a car's exhaust is emissions, burning coal is emissions, a cow farting is emissions. We also understand that in the evaluation of our emissions target, we can reduce emissions, but we can also offset emissions. So we can transition to renewables, which would mean that we are taking the emitting energy sector and completely abolishing the emissions by transitioning to renewables. Or additionally, we can also use forests to offset the amount of emissions Australia emits. So if we build trees, we know that trees act as carbon storage. So the trees kind of like gobble up all the emissions and whatever that we might emit out. And so we can offset our emissions by building trees. It raises the question, is building trees enough in its own right? Or should we also be focusing on reducing our emissions? Like if we could build enough trees to 100% counteract all of the emissions that we're currently doing, does that mean we should give up on transitioning our energy sector to renewables? Building trees is not a thing. Planting trees. Sorry, not building trees. Planting trees. Okay, we have this article to read through. The Holiness of the 2030 Targets Debate, which I was sent to read through, and I thought maybe it would be interesting. It's written by Ketan Joshi. Okay, recently, Australia's opposition leader, Peter Dutton, this was written last year in 2024, promised he'd scrap Australia's 2030 target, a 43% reduction on 2005 levels, if elected PM in 2025. He won't reveal the replacement unless he wins. Dutton's logic is that the existing 43% target is unachievable, at least without apocalyptic social collapse. There is, quote, no sense in signing up to the targets you don't have any prospect of achieving, unquote. Dutton insists. Plenty of political journalists repeated that line, such as the ABC's David Spears, who says plenty of experts also believe it will be a stretch. David Spears is like one of the journalists he's the insiders guy, right? Does he also, I guess he writes articles. Just 2 years ago, Peter Dutton was committed to 2030 emission targets, so what changed? Interesting, okay. The Labor government, 2 years in power now, claims they're working hard to hit what they describe as ambitious levels of reductions, something that has pulled them into a state of urgent action, which they claim they're rising to meet. Dutton's plan is just not a serious policy, and if you don't have a serious policy on energy and climate, then you can't be taken seriously as the alternative Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese told a Guardian Australia podcast. The point of having a target was to have ambition and try to meet it. So we set ourselves a goal, and now we're going to have to change up our industry to try and reach that goal. These spats get framed as climate wars by journalists, commentators, and politicians. Notably, the phrase did not get trotted out after the release of Labor's obscene future gas plan, laying out more ambitious post-2050, but for this news, more ambitions post-2050, but for this news cycle, it is utterly unavoidable. Peter Dutton say he wants to scrap 43% reductions by 2030. He wants to scrap that goal if he gets in.
Hello, Mr. Gasman! Yes, hello.
Welcome in, Prophet. He wants to scrap 43% reductions by 2030 if he gets in, but nothing in the headlines about Labor's future gas plans, I think is what this guy's saying. What is this? The mass-mediated public sphere is a place where narratives and meanings are circulated to make sense of what's going on in the world. There's competing research finding about whether the media tells people what to think or just what to think about. with some of the points of difference suggesting context matters. Shock. As a rule, media doesn't tell what people what to think, but certainly amongst some media consumption habits, i.e. a non-diversive media diet comprised of highly opinion-charged sources, it does seem to have a demonstrable effect on what people think about on the issue of public agenda. But in general, the broad frames that define an issue in the public sphere serve as meaning-making devices for everyday people with greater or lesser levels of influence on their views. So it is, may I say, grating to see the resurgence in commentary adopting the so-called climate wars frame in the Australian media. Report on the genuine dispute trade-off challenges? Absolutely. Adopt the blunt instrument that is the narrative of the climate wars? Well, this is a great way to strip out nuance and signal the salience of old trench warfare that has been so divisive and inhibited open and constructive discussion, which ought to include robust yet constructive debate about the challenges of climate and energy policy. I searched climate wars in Factiva today. The first chart shows articles including the term climate wars over the past 2 years. Note, Factiva includes reposts across platforms. The tallest bar on the right is the month of June 2024, the current month we're less than a fortnight into. 349 articles in the first 13 days of June. Interestingly, looking at the other chart showing distribution of climate war articles over time back to the 1990s, each bar is a year. The prior dramatic peak was in 2022, the year of the most recent federal election, which at the time was considered by some to be an end to the climate wars. This suggests the climate wars concept has been used as a sense-making tool, retrospectively more so than a wayfaring device during times of comparatively high political contention, such as in the lead up to 2022 and the baby peak in the middle of the chart in 2009. So this is just manufacturing consent. That's what I'm understanding it to be. Yeah. That like I guess it's manufacturing consent in like the public or the media has a bit of like a homogeny on what it reports on and how it reports about what's being said. And I think what this article is saying is that like the media, as we can see, we have AFR, the Australian, News Talk, Daily Mail, The Age, Saturday Paper, ABC, Sydney Morning Herald, The Conversation, The Guardian.
Hi. Greater.
Neuromancer, welcome in. Are all reporting on the climate wars through like a Dutton perspective of Dutton threatening to scrap the 2030 targets, without reporting on like the actual climate topic, I guess. And so it's like creating the wedge for us rather than telling us what the problem is and allowing us to assess who's doing the better resolution for the problem. By ABC telling us where the wedge is, it's deciding for us where the wedge is rather than us deciding where the wedge is. It's kind of how I wanted to approach the topic of climate change from is Labour doing enough for climate change? Because we could say that Labour are better than the Liberal Party, but then that would be, the wedge would be between Labour and the Liberal Party. Whereas I think when you're talking about the climate, it needs to be like climate and Labour, and the wedge is who is doing enough for the climate. They're begging the wedge. One could say they're begging the question. One could. Shifting the Overton window to the right or something. I don't know if that's what it's called. Is wedge the correct use of the term wedge? Like, I've heard the term wedge. Is wedge... You might be right with, like, Overton window. I feel like maybe... I don't know. But yeah, like, essentially, it's a wedge issue. Yeah. It definitely is a wedge issue. But I think it's like, we have, like, the wedge issue has been put between Labour and Liberal for us by the media. And then, like, the Overton window now falls over those two people. Whereas, like... Wedge issue is where an issue divides a group. Yeah. So there would be like a wedge issue between like the National Party and potentially the Liberal Party if they're deciding to go with nuclear or not go with nuclear. That will be a wedge issue, right? And the wedge issue in this case is the 2030 trajectory. The future gas strategy is a bipartisan agreement to actively worsen the climate crisis. Is he going to tell us what the future gas strategy is? Because I actually don't know what it is. Future gas strategy maps the Australian government's plan for how gas will support our economy's transition to net zero in partnership with the world. All right, I'm just going to read the article and I'm going to hope it explains it to us. The future gas strategy is a bipartisan agreement to actively worsen the climate crisis. This is the long-running climate peace. Consensus between both major parties to do an eco-fascist lean into the extractivist death spiral and bleed whatever cash benefits remain from causing climate damage. So both parties have agreed that we want to continue using gas. Both parties, neither parties, or both parties are, I guess, profiting or politically profiting off of the worsening climate crisis, I suppose is what the claim is. The climate war's framing that activates so much excitement among a media landscape that mostly ignores climate change reveals something significant. Verbal disagreements between the two parties are seen as more dangerous than the actual physical consequence of the climate disaster, and significantly more worthy of attention than assessing the performance and ambition of whichever government is in charge. Yeah, so manufacturing consent, again, the media is framing the climate wars as a this party, that party, whereas the actual problem of climate change itself is not being addressed by either party. Or like the actual problem of climate change itself is not being addressed by the media. Like we have this problem of climate change. What are these parties going to do about it? It's sort of like how we have the housing crisis and we understand that negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount is going to do something about reducing the severity of the housing crisis. But if we talk about it from this party doing that and that party doing this, we're not necessarily talking about the housing crisis as a whole. We're only assessing it from the two main party point of view about like these guys having their own debate, not about the reality of what's going to solve the housing crisis. So the same for the climate. Debate purgatory. Is that how you would use that word? Have you been reading Chomsky? I have not, actually. I have not. I do want to start reading it though. We got less than a month until my final appointment. Less than a month. Creating more hot air than dealing with it? Yes. And when it's an impending issue, when it's an impending problem about the little state of the planet that we live on, why are we so focused about the climate wars between the two parties and not about the actual problem itself? There is no war here. This is a climate pantomime, a performance crafted through data trickery and media-sweeted narrative tropes to create false distance between two political parties that largely agree on the vast bulk of climate policy. Both reject the spirit of the Paris Climate Agreement and largely disagree on style. So they both reject the spirit of the Paris Climate Agreement, being we need to reduce our emissions by 2050. Is that the crux of the Paris Climate Agreement? Is that we need to reduce our emissions by 2050 in order to avoid a 1.5 degree rise in global average temperatures? Is that what that is? Or is it 1.5 by 2023? Fuck. Can I write like gist? Is gist G-I-S-T? Aim is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels with a strong push to aim for 1.5 degrees. Is it by a certain point in time or is it just in general? Okay, I think it's just in general. We don't want to reach 2.2 degrees above global average temperatures. And if we can aim for 1.5, that'd be even better. I think that's the gist of the Paris Agreement. So both parties reject the spirit of the Paris Climate Agreement. I guess Australia will hit its 2030 targets no matter what happens with climate policy. I guess it's trying to say that neither party actually agrees on stopping that 2 degrees rise. It's more about the arguments that they want to have or the war that they want to have between themselves. But we'll continue. Be careful with Chomsky. To be honest, his genocide apologia, politically with regards to Srebrenica, that's the first time I've ever seen that word in my life, is hard to look past IMO. Not dealing with the problem and crafting discord is profitable short term. Yep. That's a good way to put it. Not dealing with the problem and crafting discord is profitable short term. Basically, if the Labour Party can make themselves look good compared to the Liberal Party, that's all they care about. They don't actually care about solving the spirit of what the Paris Climate Agreement was signed on. So long as they can look good coming out the other end when compared to the Liberal Party, it doesn't matter. Australia will hit its 2030 target no matter what happens with climate policy. Don't worry, I'll walk you through this one. I hope you're comfy. Get a snack. Get a snack, chat. Get a snack. I'm gonna have some water. Australia's power, transport, mining, industry, and agriculture sectors all release greenhouse gases. This is what we were talking about before. Mostly it's from burning coal, oil, or gas. Some methane gets released directly into the air, perhaps by pipelines transporting the gas, or by cows burping. This is the latest estimate of the total emissions from the burning of fossil fuels, plus the methane in Australia, along with what a 43% reduction from 2005 levels would look like. Hold on. Is this an image? Let me... Beautiful. Okay, Australia's emissions. These are our fossil fuel emissions since 2005. This one, the red triangle, is our target reductions. That's where we want to be by 2030, is this red triangle. And our fossil fuel emissions come 2022, which I guess was when this was made, has not changed very much, is what I'm understanding this to say. That'll do? Okay. Betsy the cow is still missing. Rip, man. Rip Betsy. So, out of the power, transport, mining, industry, agriculture, and I guess it's like fugitive emissions as well as included in this. This is how our fossil fuel emissions have changed since 2005. This is where we need to be. This is where our target is. So if we want to reach our target, we've done fuck all in fossil fuel emissions in order to get there. So how then are we going to get there? Right. So we need some urgent policy heft, pulling downwards on that stubborn solid line, right? This solid line here. While the latest projections report from the government examines what happens without any new policies to reduce emissions. A decline driven largely by coal power shutdowns and new clean energy. No matter what we do, and assuming no major reversal of trends, the natural state of affairs will result in some progress. Sorry, I think I'm going to have to read this again for a second. The latest projections report from the government examines what happens without any new policies to reduce emissions. A decline driven largely by coal power shutdowns and new clean energy. Sorry, I didn't scroll down to see I was saying I didn't see like a downward trend unless it was like that there, but then I would assume that that's like COVID. Yep. Somehow. I don't know. I think it's talking about this one here. No matter what, so because we have a natural move away from coal and whatever, we have like a rising in renewables. This is, I think, the trajectory that we're meant to be going on, I think is what it's saying. So by 2030 here, this is the projected line by the government. I think did it say they released a report? Latest projections report from the government. Yeah, okay, so latest projections report from the government. Says that with our natural transition to renewable energy from fossil fuels, we're gonna reach here. That's still a long way between where we need to be and where we're going to be, just with our transition away from fossil fuel energy. Almost all of the drop in the dotted line you see above comes from the power sector moving away from about 39% non-fossil energy in 2023 to about 68% in 2030. Is that... Hold on. Where was the... Fuck my life. What was I in before? Energy? I'm about to... I don't think I made one. Wait, surely I did. Hello? Oh, it was here. 35% renewables. Okay, I think maybe this one's more up to date in that we're 39% renewables right now in 2023. But this says 35% renewables. Where are they getting that 4% from? Was that an updated figure? Where are they getting that 4% from? Mine says 35. Hold on, let me see. Open electricity. Oh, fuck my life. 4% from the giant hamster wheel. Like real? Like real though? Like not like hamster wheel, but like, was it that bio energy one that is the 4%? Renewables, 15%. %38.9% in 2024. 2023 was 38.6%. Am I reading that correct? Sorry, I know it's like super zoomed out. Let me go down. See here, renewables. If I hover over 2024, there's 38.9%. Okay, I think that's where it's coming from. All right, I'll accept it, 39%. I've accepted it, 39%. Almost all of that drop in the dotted line you seen above comes from the power sector, moving from about 39% non-fossil energy in 2023 to about 68% in 2030. So we're projected to get to 68% renewable energy generation for the grid by 2030. That's a really big increase, no? That's a really big increase. That's like 30% in 5 years, no? Or 8 years, I suppose. As a colorblind person, this graph is my enemy. A cautious projection is way less than the most pessimistic scenario in the grid operator's plan for the national electricity market. A cautious projection, it's way less than the most pessimistic scenario in the grid operator's plan. Okay, so I think they're being humble. Is it humble? They're being humble. Absolute changes from 2023 by sector. This is their projections and how it's going to change over time. Absolute change by sector. Projections excluding unreliable land use data. Is unreliable a biased word here? Or is unreliable a scientific word? When it's being used by the DCCEEW, how would you even call that? Or is it this guy making graphs? Hold up. Where is this graph from? The graph is giving wishful thinking. Okay, so the graph is being like generous, you mean? It's way less a cautious projection. It's way less than the most pessimistic scenario. Fuck land use. Me and my homies hate land use. We like land use. Is unreliable. I just wonder if the last one, the graph is giving wishful thinking. This graph is giving wishful thinking. And then this one is being less wishful. Anyway, sorry. Okay, I think I'm just gonna have to move on. But, okay. Total electrical generation 2030. Wind and solar is gonna create... Ah, okay. What is that? Fuck, I can't count. 60, okay, whatever. They're in line anyway. This one, that drop off, yeah, okay. I see it. But still not reaching that 43% reduction target. Remember, this here is the 43% reduction target. This is what our move from fossil fuels via renewables, this is where it's going to get us by that 43% reduction target year. So how do we make up? This part? How much is that? Fuck, I don't know, whatever. How do we make that up? You have to understand that coal-fired power plants will be decommissioned and there's no will to rebuild them that starts to become very important in the 2030s. Do you reckon this article is going to get into it? coal-fired plants will be decommissioned and there is no will to rebuild them. That starts to become very important in 2030s. Like, that would be a good thing, but then what about all the gas as well? Isn't the spirit, or not like the spirit, but isn't like the sentiment that even if we are technically moving away from coal, we still are allowing for gas-produced energy in the energy sector anyway, well past 2050? Like, the future gas strategy is taking us well past 2050 with gas generation. And so assessing that like discrepancy between where we're going to be by 2030 and when we should be, and I assume this is going to get into LULUCF, is it also good enough? Where have you been? I've been lacking knowledge lately. I've been at work. I'm sorry, Jolly. I usually work Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and I'm going to try to be here on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday from 2 p.m. Lock that in your heads. I'm going to try and commit to a 2 p.m. stream, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And I work on the other days. Nice to see you though, Jolly. I forgot to install my solar panel. We won't make the target. Fuck. Shidu, if you have anything interesting to read article-wise, feel free to send to me. Okay, still not reaching the 43% reduction target. So the same projections report also modeled what happens if the government's 82% clean energy target were to be met, along with the impact of fuel efficiency standards now having passed parliament but watered down. This is what it looks like. Okay, so the government has a 82% clean energy target, which I wasn't aware of. We have a 82% clean energy target that we're going to meet, which will also change the trajectory of our energy sector. So we're going to transition away from fossil fuels. There's something in place for us to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy or to clean energy. Along with the fuel efficiency standards, I suppose fuel efficiency being like policy implemented for cars and shit. Big cars and dead weight dragging down climate policy. Okay. I suppose it means that like the Labour have implemented fuel efficiency standards for cars, so cars aren't allowed we aren't allowed cars that are like gas guzzling climate fuckers. I don't know, whatever. What do you do for work? If you don't mind disclosing. Oh, I do sleep science. I'm a sleep scientist. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday I do sleep science. I analyze like sleep studies, polysomnography data thingies, and I report on them, interpret the data and whatever. Now having been passed in Parliament, have been watered down, this is what it looks like. Australia's emissions, so that one's with fossil fuel reductions only. That's the projections. Now we have fossil fuel reductions. Oh my God, sorry. We have fossil fuel reductions plus the policy for 82% clean energy target and the fuel efficiency standards. So this is when we factor in all of the things that are going to be implemented policy-wise. Where does that trajectory now take us? Now that we've factored in these additional things, it takes us to here. So we've gone from here to here. We are still a fair way away from our target here. Lower, sure, again, mostly due to power sector, but still the gap remains. Well, guess what? We excluded a sector that the government includes. Human changes to carbon stored in land. When you plant trees, that is a human influence that causes carbon to be sucked from the air. When you cut down a bunch of trees and burn them, that releases carbon. If the land use figure is negative, that's more of the first. When it's positive, more of the second. So when the land use figure takes us into the negative, that means we've planted trees that are sucking up the carbon from the air. But when that land use figure is positive, we have, I guess, reduced the land in Australia that is sucking up carbon from the air. So now it is sucking carbon. I guess when you have a bushfire, that number would go into the positive, I suppose, potentially, if you haven't like built enough trees over the past like year or whatever. to account for that bushfire that lost all those trees, etc. I don't know. Or if you log like a forest or whatever, that would put the number into the positive. But so long as you plant enough trees, it'll keep that number in the negative. So it'll be reducing emissions for your country, which is true. It hold on, I think I watched a good video on LULUCF the other day. Let me see. Hi, Amy.
Climate change is a global emergency and international agreements are crucial in fighting it. But to most people, the jargon used at climate talks is baffling. Among the most complex areas is LULUCF, which stands for land use change, and forest. In its simplest form, this refers to the impact that fields and forests have on the climate. This may seem like a niche area of interest to only a handful of specialists, but it matters to us all because destroying forests and clearing land for agriculture releases vast amounts of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, around a fifth of the planet's total. That's more than the emissions created by all the cars, ships, and planes in the world combined. But just as deforestation causes climate change, so protecting, maintaining, and restoring forests, wetlands, and damaged agricultural land can prevent it, because trees, plants, and soil all absorb and store large amounts of carbon. Right now, the European Union is at a crossroads in deciding how to deal with LULUCF, or to put it another way, how it measures and reduces emissions from land and forest. The consequences of the decision will be profound. If the European Union decides to mix measuring carbon from forests and land with carbon from burning of fossil fuels, it could be disastrous, leading to less CO2 emissions being reduced overall and doing nothing to protect the forest. This is because emissions reductions from forests and land will be used to avoid the more difficult task of cutting down on fossil fuels. In reaching its decision, the European Union must recognize that the carbon absorbed by trees and fields from the atmosphere does not cancel out emissions from fossil fuels. Removals of carbon from fields and forests are temporary because they naturally release carbon as they die. But the emissions from burning fossil fuels stay in the atmosphere for centuries. The path for the European Union is therefore quite clear. Emission reductions from LULUCF must be accounted for separately to those from fossil fuels. To tackle climate change, we must urgently reduce fossil fuel emissions and protect and restore forests and other ecosystems.
Was it the European Union? Did he say European Union was trying to decide whether or not it wanted to include LULUCF? This is from 8 years ago, though. So something like 2016. European Union LULUCF inclusion. The EU includes land use change, and forestry in its 2030 climate and energy framework. This is done through the LULUCF regulation adopted in 2018. The regulation aims to incentivize EU member states to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase removals in the LULUCF sector. Specifically, it sets a no net debit rule, meaning emissions from LULUCF must be offset by equivalent removals. Wait, so you have to reduce your emissions equally to how much your LULUCF is offsetting your climate emissions? I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly. How are y'all? I'm good, thanks, Amy. It's nice to see you. What are you up to this weekend? Trees are such little bros. It's definitely definitely very important not to completely destroy all the natural biodiversity. What is it? I don't know. The fuck trees. Good for the climate not to destroy the trees, but it's also good for the climate not to emit heaps. If the land use figure is negative, okay. The idea here is that when you dig up gigatons of carbon from deep underground, it can all be sucked up by trees on Earth's surface. So you can smush the two types of data together into one net figure. To be clear, this is an extremely wrong thing to do, as Earth scientist Kate Dooley wrote a few days ago. I think he's... Fuck trees, Elise Peach, controversial streamer. Went for a walk today after the floods, no injured animals, and they're all happy. They get to see the koalas, how the koalas are going tomorrow. Aw, cute. Are you out where you're out where the floods are? I hope you're safe. I hope everyone you know is safe. Ending native forest logging would help Australia's climate goals much more than planting trees. Okay. Kate Dooley wrote this sentence. Kate Dooley is interdisciplinary scholar with expertise in climate policy and law, ethics, human rights, and is currently a lecturer in climate change politics at the University of Melbourne. She writes for The Conversation. She sounds smart. My town flooded, but I'm thankfully up on the higher, drier side and it's receding for everyone now. Okay, that's good. That is good. It's kind of wild that it flooded though. That is crazy. I've never experienced a flood before. Okay, so Kate Dooley wrote, another problem with net accounting is it treats all carbon as equivalent, meaning a ton of carbon sequestered in the trees, so slurped up by the trees, compensates for a ton of carbon from burned fossil fuels. This has no scientific basis. Carbon dioxide emissions are effectively permanent as the buried carbon we dig up and burn stays in the atmosphere for millennia, while carbon in trees is temporary in comparison. As trees grow, their carbon storage compensates for earlier logging and clearing emissions, which is an important climate benefit. But we're not comparing apples and apples. Forest carbon doesn't compensate for fossil fuel emissions. It has no science. So forest carbon can't compensate for fossil fuel emissions because fossil fuel emissions are permanent emissions, whereas forest sequestration, did I say that right? Sequestration is temporary. Your forests are, by the very nature of being forests, they are temporary. And so long as you're continuing to renew those forests, yes, they will suck up the carbon and whatever. But it's not apples for apples. It's not one for one. It's not a perfect carbon capture mechanism. Non-stop rain for a week was crazy. It's nice to see the sun today. Always wondered how it worked. Now I know. Technically, the tree carbon could be permanent if we didn't then process and burn the trees. Like sequestering 400 million tons of tree wood would permanently offset carbon, but we don't. We burn them all over again. But also they do like naturally die off and everything as well. Like if you could have 4 million tons of trees, like you just had it, and it existed forever, then yes, it would be permanent. But the very nature of 400 million tons of trees is not in itself permanent, like the emissions are permanent. The emissions themselves are permanent. The trees are not. Therefore, it's not a one-for-one analysis. And so you can't say that those trees are going to permanently sequester the carbon from the air. It has no scientific basis, but it obviously has a political one. Including land use completely changes the narrative on emissions. Recent emissions look lower and the base year of 2005 gets shifted much higher. That squeezes both ends, and that means the 2023 projections only see a small gap between the target and the business as usual future. So we have the purple line. Hold on. The purple is our new line. The purple is our new line of where our emissions were/are if we include the land use data. And now there's a revised target Is that right? There's a revised target because of the land use data. So if we exclude the land use data from the target, it would be here. But if we're including the land use data, I don't know why the target changes. I don't know why it changes. Why does that change? Did he explain that? I don't know if I understood that. Storing the harvested wood. The wood itself is the carbon sequestered. Just grow the trees that live for like 1,000 years. The trees can breathe by themselves regardless of how long they live. But this is, okay, so this is the new projection with the land use included for offsetting those projections. And then this is the new target. Okay. Add in the 82% clean energy target and the fuel standards, and guess what? Target essentially hit. Oh, okay. Okay. So that's the projections with land use. And then this new light purple one is the projections with land use and the policies on top. Okay, and the policies on top. I'm understanding this. The world is on course for 5 to 3 increase in the next few decades. It's game over. Pragmatically, I'd say natural sequestration at least buys us time, since decomposition takes many decades. Definitely, like, yeah, buys us time, but are we doing enough outside of that land use to also reduce 1.5 by 2050? Seems very convenient to make a more lenient target while also accounting for land use. Yeah, I think that's what, like, the sentiment is. Hi, Larrikin, and also Orange. What's up? Nice to see you. I think that's kind of what the sentiment is that we're allowing the land use data to carry a lot of what the emissions target is, or a lot of what the climate change goal is. Okay, so we hit the target. We have set our policy and we've hit it via the natural transition, or not the natural transition, but via the market transition from fossil fuel industry to renewable energy, as well as the policy targets. We have the market like targets of energy, and we have the market trajectory of energy, and we have the legislated target of energy, and we have the, what was the other one? The car one, the fuel efficiency policies as well. And we also have land use offsetting all of our emissions too, which has revised this figure to show that we have met it. Planning to make pizza for dinner? Hell yes. Seems like a bad bet if you want to store your carbon in trees in a country that will be more and more bushfire prone. I think if you were to have a bushfire, you're not, like, your emissions aren't technically penalized. I think I looked this up yesterday. If you have a bushfire, your emissions aren't technically penalized from like a federal number perspective. According to, like, the Paris Climate Agreement, or like the Kyoto Protocol, or something like that. According to one of these things, if you have a bushfire and it wasn't purposely lit, then those emissions or those emission reductions lost via that land use change you're not penalized for that somehow, I think. We also can't predict the land use at all. If the tree dies of old age and decomposes into the soil, it's good, but if a bushfire comes along and burns it, then the carbon goes back up to the atmosphere. Both of those things can happen with zero human interaction. Imagine if 2020 bushfires counted against us. We'd be completely fucked in the agreements. We should still plant more and prevent clearing, though. Yeah, for sure. Like, land use and land use change, like, the whole, like, land use is, like, a real thing. Like, if we were to log all of our forests, that would be fucked for the climate. It would definitely be fucked. Even IPCC projections amount to it's fucked, and they already complain about too much influence from fossil fuel interest in their reports. If a tree falls in a forest and no one witnesses decomposing, did it really have any carbon impact at all? The 2023 projections data essentially scrapes through to thanks almost entirely to the inclusion of land use data and partly due to the power and transport sector policies. Here's the problem. The power sector transformation isn't really going as planned. A policy vacuum for the 4 years since the end of the renewable energy target in 2020 has resulted in some of the lowest rates of clean energy investment in years. Clean energy generation growth is decelerating, and that, paired with growing demand, means emissions are rising again. Okay, so our growing demand of energy means that naturally we have coal and gas, so we have a rising demand of energy not only within the renewable sector, but also the coal and gas, so that's naturally going to rise as we need more energy, as we have more demand for energy. And then we have 4 years since the end of the renewable energy target in 2020 has resulted in some of the lowest rates of clean energy investment in years. I don't know what this is referring to. I wish historians would suggest how the cultural powers likely present in late 2030s will react to the hot and disastrous situation. I often wonder, when the old white men of the oil era die, will they be replaced by more sensible people? I think there'll always be players in those sectors. Unfortunately, I think there always is going to be. I saw it was recently discovered that new growth forests are actually a net increase to CO2 for the first 60 years of a tree's life. God, I've never heard of that. Interesting though. Hi, Dank. Generation projects, project tracker. Do we just have like a nice little graph? Cumulative capacity of financially committed wind and solar projects by quarter. Financially committed generation projects and investment by quarter. Oh, come on. Investment? Can I look up investment? What is it talking about? Breakdown of generation project investment by development stage. Did you read my giant vomit in the poll channel on Discord the other day? Maybe. I don't remember. What was it about? Solar? What is this? Onshore wind and solar projects. Onshore solar. Investment since 2017, with 2020 being the year that... Is this what it's is this the right graph? Dollars per megawatts for wind and large scale projects. So investment in projects in the 2017 to 2020, when there were, what was he talking about? When there were policy vacuum for the 4 years since the end of the renewable energy target by 2020 has resulted in some of the lowest rates of clean energy investment in years. So we did have something in place up until 2020, policy-wise, for investing in the renewable energy target. But then the claim is there has been a policy vacuum since 2020. And so 2020 to 2024, we have seen a far less financial investment in the renewable energy sector, I think is what this is saying. And you can see that by showing all of these different investment things over here in the earlier years, and it's a far sparser over this side. I think this is correct. Total capacity for projects financially committed in 2024 by state. Fuck. What the hell, Victoria? What the hell? Did you know about this? 2024, first year to pass 1.5 degree. Oh my god, no. Wait, so we've already hit it. The planet has moved a major step closer to warming more than 1.5 degrees, new data shows, despite world leaders vowing a decade ago they would try to avoid this. The European Copernicus Climate Service, that's not a real word, one of the main global data providers, said on Friday that 2024 was the first calendar year to pass the symbolic threshold, as well as the world's hottest on record. This does not mean the international 1.5 degree target has been broken, because that refers to a long-term average over decades, but does bring us nearer to doing so as fossil fuel emissions continue to heat the atmosphere. Last week, UN Chief Antonio Guterres, fucked up that name, described the recent run of temperature records as climate breakdown. We must exit this road to ruin, and we have no time to lose, he said in his New Year message, calling for countries to slash emissions of planet-warming gases in 2025. 1.6 degrees above pre-industrial average in 2024. That's crazy. Look at that jump. Governor General becoming supreme leader. Oh. Had the verbiage of a constitutional law professor for the most part. I don't think I did read it, but I would be interested. It's pretty bad, although I assume if they ever tried to start shit, we'd have something similar to the American War for Independence. Is it about the fact that, like, the final... Is it about, like, the fact that the final, like, head of power in Australia is the Governor General? Is that the sentiment? There's no renewable plan that fixes this. There's only tech bro hopium that we somehow invent a carbon capture tech that somehow works out to be energy positive somehow. I suppose it's like... At what level does at what point does the planet become inhabitable? Inhabitable? Is that right? Sorry. At what point does the Earth become inhabitable? Like, at what temperature increase does it become, like, fucked, basically? Like, in Australia, uninhabitable, okay. At what point does the planet become uninhabitable for, like, the average person, I guess, compared to against what we know it as? Like, we're obviously already seeing, like, bushfires and natural, or, like, weather events and stuff that are beyond, the norm. But at what point does it get to, like, outrageous levels? Like, some people are finding their homes to be uninsurable. What are they supposed to do? Are they meant to sell off their homes? Are they ever going to be able to make that money back if their house is uninsurable? Are they going to be able to sell it to someone because their house is uninsurable? Previous climate maxes, temperature was 4.1 degrees higher on average. Probably won't be a direct heat or climate related issue that makes it bad. It'll be something like all of one species dying, causing some kind of domino effect. Is there any theory on, like, what this actually looks like? I mean, there would be, right? But, like, I guess what I'm asking is, what is the theory? Does anyone know of the theory? Or a theory? Source, just watched it here. It's unlikely to be uninhabitable. It's just a scale of cost of adaptation. Yeah, so not necessarily, like, yeah. But I don't necessarily mean uninhabitable. I guess I didn't really have, like, the... Not necessarily uninhabitable, but... Like, the cost of living, the cost of adaptation is, like, beyond fucked for, I guess, a significant portion of society. And then at that point, the government would have to step in and do something for these people. And would it be better for the government to be precautionary now than having to, I guess, compensate or just do something to alleviate the stress of a future that's fucked for climate? I remember becoming obsessed with a specific topic. Then we covered the Constitution and politics course I did at uni. I spent way too long writing that Discord post though. I was on my phone and kept swapping between a PDF and notes to write the damn thing. I'll have to read it, Cahill. I will have to read it. When did you post it? Yesterday? I saw something last night about volcanoes in Antarctica. It was very interesting. They were saying there's a thing with the glaciers melting can cause more magma / more eruptions. Carl expanded quite a bit. Also, the shady circumstances surrounding the terms appointing of governor generals. How about we summarize the averages on climate change per country and then globally and make sense of that? As in, like, assess every country's climate change, like, policy or whatever. Like, how good are certain countries doing for the climate? We do that, don't we? Isn't that what, like, Isn't that what the climate tracker website is? And isn't this the whole point of, fucking hell. Oh my god. Holy shit. This is the most black pill thing I've ever seen in my life. Nowhere is green. No, literally no country is compatible with the Paris Agreement. Who signed on to the Paris Agreement? Like, who signed it? The EU and 194 states, totaling over 98% of greenhouse gas emissions, have ratified or acceded to the agreement. The only countries which have not ratified are some greenhouse gas emitters in the Middle East, Iran with 2% of the world total being the largest. Libya and Yemen have also not ratified the agreement. Eritrea is the latest country to ratify the agreement on the 7th of Feb 2023. It's not a cost of adaptation. It's a complete breakdown of crop yields and water sources. It's wars for water sources, mass migration for the south like never seen before. It's bad. He posted it like 3 days ago. Oh my god, thank you. Oh my god, thank you so much. Hold on, is that gonna open up my an app? Yes, please. Fuck yes. Okay, I've got it. I will read it later. Thank you so much, Vex. Things like the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement are really more of an excuse for the police to meet up and get on the beers with each other. They never intended on actioning on them. It's still like, so how I see it from like my dumbass perspective is the point of like the Paris Climate Agreement is all of these countries come together and they acknowledge that climate change is happening. They acknowledge the reality of climate science and they all go, okay, we all understand that what we're doing currently is fucking the world. We get that. So what are we all going to do in order to reduce these emissions to save the world? How are we going to, like, what are we all going to do to save the world? We all have to pull our part because we understand that the production is causing emissions. We understand that, like, if we change our production away from fossil fuels, away from like coal and gas and oil, all these juicy things that make us a lot of money, if we just individually transition away from these, we are basically shooting ourselves in the foot economically. So we must all come together and basically agree to equally shoot ourselves in the foot in terms of like capital. So not one country can get ahead of anyone else off of the back of destroying the planet. We're all going to agree, we're all going to come in a room, we're all going to shake hands, we're all going to agree that we have to do something. We're going to equally share that weight together. This is why when like we had we were reading the CPRS for the Rudd government, it's not even shooting ourselves in the foot, solar and wind are cheaper. Yeah, but it's about losing the export of like gas and coal as well. Of which like the petrostates, Australia and I guess the Middle East and stuff as well. It's not just about transitioning our energy sector away to like renewables because they are technically cheaper, but it's also about like, remember that the majority of the gas that Australia mines up, we export it for money. And so it is a big part of our economy relying on the fossil fuel industry, regardless of whether we 100% transition to renewables or not. And so it's also about that part of the economy. Hands out knives, everyone cut a toe off. Pretty much, like everyone has to, you all have to cut your little toe off. We're all agreeing we're going to cut our little toe off. No one gets to walk away from this meeting without cutting their little toe off. But then some people will, or basically fucking everyone else and going, you guys have to carry your weight. But this is like when we were looking at the CPRS and we were analysing the CPRS, the Rudd government initiative to put a price on carbon. There was that stipulation of, we have signed we are going along to I don't remember what it was. It was like the Copenhagen summit or whatever, the Copenhagen climate summit. We're going along, and if the deal is in place, we're going to aim to reduce our emissions by this year by 15%. But if the other countries don't agree to this summit target, we're going to commit to 5%. And so they're still committing to doing something, but they're not going to commit to doing as much, because other countries haven't also committed to doing as much. So they still want to, basically just admitting that they still want to prop up their economy off of coal and gas, and they're not going to fuck themselves up by not doing that. Problem is batteries aren't cheap. That's what make renewables expensive in the long term. If we had a domestic battery manufacturing industry, it would be so much cheaper than anything else proposed. It's not like nuclear is a bad option for Australia overall. It's just about reaching these climate reduction targets in time, in a way that's going to have the overall less emissions by 2050 or whatever. I used to be pro-nuclear, but I'm leaning more to decentralized renewables plus storage, which done right is much more resilient and adaptive. I think I agree with that. Like, decentralized solar, you can do like a mix of like centralized solar and decentralized on people's rooftops, right? Which would be really good, because then you don't have as much a reliance on the energy grid for everyone too. In 2017, the Trump administration delivered an official notice to the United Nations that the United States, the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China, intended to withdraw from the Paris Agreement as soon as it was eligible to do so. The notice of withdrawal could not be submitted until the agreement was enforced for 3 years for the US. On the 4th of November 2019, the US government deposited the notification with the Secretary General of the United Nations and officially withdrew 1 year later in 2020. Joe Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office in 2021 to readmit the United States into the Paris Agreement. Following the 30-day period set by Article 21.3, the US was readmitted to the agreement. United States climate envoy John Kerry took part in virtual events, saying that the US would earn its way back into legitimacy in the Paris process. United Nations Secretary General Antonio welcomed the return of the United States as restoring the missing link that weakened the whole. On January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order again, withdrawing the US from the agreement. Fuck's sake. Absolutely, I should go back to reading this article that we're reading. We've gone like off on a tangent, trying to read these graphs, and this one, and this one, and this one blackpilled me. This one's crazy. Look, at least we're not in like the red or the black area. We're just insufficient. We're on par with America. Wow. Someone that's not even in the agreement. Backward policy pegged as weakening the whole. I managed to decipher the donor on Frenzy Jorblies. So you are the Looney Greens defender. Sad. Frenzied Jorblies. Yes. Did you also decipher that the reason my username was blocked is because Friendly Jordies has to have actively blocked my username from his chat? Which means that he's seen like at least one of the 2 videos I've made mentioning his name. 100%, he's 100% aware of the fact that the ALP aren't doing enough to meet net zero, 100% aware, yet he'd rather make a video saying, when I think of Angus Taylor, I think of McDonald's, like sick burn broski. I think that's like the frustration. I think that is my major frustration with Friendly Jordies, and it is like it's almost alternatively like my favorite thing about Punter Politics is Punter Politics Conrad from Punter Politics, Conrad has adopted this whole policy over party, and I like 100% agree. I 100% agree. You don't have to be
Great.
Welcome in, Prince. You don't have to be invested in a political party, one political party, to be good at commentating on politics. I almost think that the converse is true. You should be like free to navigate, like you have that freedom to navigate within the policy and around the policy of the different political parties to determine which policy is going to be better. Unless, of course, you have a stake in one particular political party winning, then you don't have that freedom to navigate through the policy. You have to advocate for one particular party. To rehash this graph, we have This red triangle is the Australia's 2030 emissions reduction target. So by the year 2030, we want our emissions to be where this red triangle is. This black line is our fossil fuel industry, and where our energy sector is going to take us is this black dotted line. With the addition of policy incentives, disincentives, and whatever, that trajectory then takes us on this grey dotted line. But then if we also factor in land use emission offsets, so the forests that we have and how much they gobble up our emissions, if we also then factor that in on top of all of this, it changes into this purple line here. With all the policies and everything, it turns into this light purple dotted line, and our new target is now this yellow square. So we've been fudging the numbers pretty much a little bit, tiny bit, to make up the target and make up the trajectory. Not entirely, that's kind of like I'm being like hyperbolic when I say it like that. There definitely is like a reality to this figure, but the big question mark is how much of that is reality and how much of that is speculative historical revision on the numbers, which I'm going to continue reading just to catch you all up on where we are. ADHD hours. I was overseas. Did you have your follow-up appointment? I've had one so far. I have another one next week. Let me check my calendar. What's the date today? The 3rd of June is my second appointment, and then like the 17th of June is my psychiatrist appointment. The super tax should be 100% after 3 million, not 30%. Good luck. Hell yeah, best of luck. Thanks, Andrew. Where were you overseas to? Who needs more than 3 million? I agree. The 2023 projections data essentially scrapes through to thanks most entirely to the inclusion of land use data and partly due to the power and transport sector policies. Here's the problem. The power sector transformation isn't really going as planned. A policy vacuum for the 4 years since the end of the renewable energy target in 2020 has resulted. We saw this. We already read this. There is a far less investment in the renewable sector in the past 4 years than the years prior to those 4 years. So the investment has decelerated. As Nine wrote, the government set a target in law last year to reduce Australia's emissions by 43% by 2030, but is facing significant doubts about whether its policies will reach that target because of delays to major renewable energy projects and the construction of new transmission lines. Others, like The Guardian's Karen Middleton, cite a 2023 Climate Change Authority report that correctly points out that clean power growth isn't on track to achieve the 82% target, the 82% target that was implemented via a policy. So they implemented that in some sort of policy, whatever it was, saying we are going to hit 82% renewable energy target by so-and-so year. They're not on track to meet that. Considering the projections only just scraped through, assuming full success on the 82% clean power goal, being off track for that means it's a problem, right? A few weeks ago, you might have been right, but you aren't anymore. So that land use data I mentioned, not only does it beautify the emissions trajectory and weaken the target when you apply it, you can also historically revise the land use data as your methods improve. It isn't just magic, it becomes more magical every single year. So we look at this like square kilometer of trees and we think that is going to soak up 10 units of emissions. And then the next year you go, actually we've revised our numbers and we think that amount of trees are going to suck up. Actually, I think I'm kind of lying. I think I'm interpreting this wrong. I'm like telling you wrong. You look at all of our nature, the government's they're looking at all of our trees and forests and they go, we think that this is soaking up 100 units of emissions. And then the next year they go, actually, I think I forgot to include like a 1 there. I think it's actually soaking up 110 units of emissions. And then like the next year they go, actually, on revision, I think that is soaking up 120 units, and so on and so on. And they're revising it every single year in a trajectory that makes it look better and better and better and better and better. Not only that, but it makes the starting point of when we started measuring our emissions, they make that number worse, stretching out how good we are now and how bad we were then, making our trajectory of something like this into something like this, making us look so much better than we are. And when the Ketan Joshi writes this article, he's saying that when our 82% target is going to be off and we've realized we've fallen behind, magically 1 year later our revisions makes up for that little gap that we're going to have, just magically. So now don't worry, we don't have to worry about the fact that we're falling behind, because our revision data makes up for that. That's essentially what's going on. Percentiles are distracting, skewing data, pretty much. Hi JP, how you doing? Oh, South Africa. Oh my god, hell yeah. It isn't just magic, it becomes more magical every single year. Revisions to the methods used to measure land use emissions have every single time for at least the past 5 years, and probably longer before I began tracking it, been auspiciously and delightfully spitting out results that exactly favour the narrative of the government in charge, putting Australia on track to achieve every previous target, even when fossil emissions fall too slow, stagnate, or rise. And as I wrote in this piece, the most recent revision to land use data has the most significant ever impact on Australia's reported greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry, I wasn't listening to this. As I wrote in this piece, the most recent revision to land use data has the most significant ever impact on Australia's reported greenhouse gas emissions. So it was the most recent revision, when this piece was written, the most recent revision to the land use data emission percentage was the single-handedly the biggest reduction. A reduction equivalent to the actual real reduction of the past 5 full years of all new wind and solar built in the country. So the single am I understanding this correctly? The single reduction, that single one history revision, was equivalent to wind and solar built in the past 5 years, to the real impact of wind and solar in the past 5 years. It's a rough calculation, but I've applied these historical revisions to the projections data. The 2024 projections, due to be published in December this year, will almost certainly look something like this. The green one. So the dark green is the latest projections when this article was written, and the light green is where Ketan Joshi is assuming the next revision will put us. Solar has since exploded globally and here. Since this article was written, you mean? Or since when? Hi, Jas. Roughly? There's zero efforts to rely on renewable energy. Well, yeah, because they're relying more heavily on the LULUCF. The land use data now has such an extreme effect on masking fossil fuel emissions that the Labor government could fail to achieve its clean power target and fail to reduce transport emissions and still hit the overall emissions reductions target. Land use data revisions mean no new policies actually need to work to hit the 2030 target. So we could scrap the policy. We can scrap the policies that are going to put us on track for these targets, and the land use trajectory change will, or the land use revisions will alone get us there because of the way that they've been revised so far. Been back and forth, getting the odd chore done. Nice. The power sector could be 14% below the clean proportion target, and it won't threaten the economy-wide target. Okay, I'm sorry, we've racked up a lot of info here. Let me summarize. 1, we started with the fossil fuel sector, and we saw that 43% reduction is tough. We wrongly added in land use data, pretending temporary storage of carbon in trees is the same as not emitting. That gets us most of the way to a 43% cut, and all the way when you include Labor's recent clean power and transport policies. We applied the recent revision of land use data to the future vision in 2 and found that it's so significant that you don't even need to those exact extra policies to hit that 43% target. Land use data and its revisions mean there is almost no way Australia can't hit a 43% reduction target by 2030, even without new policies. So we have this black line is the baseline of fossil fuels. So when you're just looking at our fossil fuel emission reductions alone, that's where that's going to put us. When you add the policies on top of that, so the policies that incentivize, disincentivize, whatever, this gray line is the new one. When we add in the land use data, so the emissions, it's this purple one.
I am the milkman. My milk is delicious.
Hi, Cactus.
31 baby cakes.
31 baby cakes. How are you, Cactus? Nice to see you. Hi. Disproportionate lack of efforts. Carbon credits are another con. Thank you so much for the 31 months. That's crazy. 31 baby cakes is so many baby cakes. Incentives are a joke. My milk is delicious. It's from Psychonauts. It's a good game. Good level. What are we yapping about? Climate. Climate and labor. Labor. Okay. On top of the... Okay, we had the land use data. And then we add the land use with the policies, is this light purple. And then we have the revised land data. And then we have the revised land data with the policies. And then we have the targets for fossil fuels, is this one. And then we have the target for land use data, which brings us to here. So when we include land use data, our target emission reductions changes because of that addition. What a journey from a wide gulf between stubborn fossil fuel emissions and the target to a projection that shows Australia will achieve the ambitious 2030 goal without lifting an additional finger. In December, the Department of Environment and the Climate Change Authority will release their assessments and projections, and my prediction is that they will absolutely definitely show that Australia will meet and beat its 2030 targets. The role of historical revisions of land use data will be obscured, maybe mentioned in a footnote, and most of this change will be attributed to policy performance on the part of the government. This will be widely reported and repeated, and most of the people who hear the news will be none the wiser. This is what climate peace looks like, the continued extraction and burning of fossil fuels on a massive scale without any disagreement or discontent. After Dutton announced he was going to ditch the 2030 targets, there was some misleading reporting. Incentives, but it was later clarified that really reneging on a submitted 2030 target would breach the conventions of the pact and truly be a genuinely bad geopolitical look. If it matters so much that Dutton wants to ditch the 2030 target, why does it not matter at all that Labor wants to use a land use cheat sheet to meet most of it? We're going back to the initial sentiment of the article, which is, why are we so scared? Why are we so focused on the climate wars between Labor and the Liberal when neither of them are going to put us on track to actually stop 1.5 degrees global warming? What is the difference between formally rejecting a target and subtly rejecting it when it comes to the hard physical danger of fossil fuels? I do understand that there is a sentiment of like voting for the lesser of two evils in this situation. Like if you had to pick one over the other, it would be picking Labor, obviously, in regards to the climate. When it really comes down to our preferential voting system though, because we do have preferential voting, there are ways to vote in or vote for people that are going to do more for the climate. If they're talking about doing more for the climate, you have like the Teals, you have the Greens, you have other independents as well that are climate focused too. But the way that this discussion has been framed within the media is to make it a war between Liberal Party and Labor. I am not. I had a day date and she's now at her parents', so I am here. How is your day date? What did you get up to? I couldn't resist murdering an industry. The Paris Agreement is about putting real blood, sweat and tears into changes that begin the full-scale elimination of fossil fuels from human society as fast as possible. The Labour Party once did this with the renewable energy target, but they are not doing this today. If Labour were dedicated to the Paris Agreement, they wouldn't have weakened their original 45% cut adopted in 2015 to 43% in 2021. If they were dedicated to it, the targets would be formulated on the real challenge: rapid, deep reductions in the country's fossil fuel burning sectors, along with agriculture. Land use targets would exist, but exist completely separate from other sectors. And of course, the targets would be aligned to an ambitious temperature target as the absolute, most basic first step towards real policies that answer the urgency of the threat. The Climate Change Authority would be actively calling for a separate target, and the Environment Department would do it by default. The climate groups would refuse to engage with the modified dodgy number and simply rate the government's performance based on fossil sectors only, as would business and other political parties and independents. Soon, Australia will need to set a target for 2035. In December last year, the Climate Change Authority suggested cuts of at least 65% by 2035. They compared this to the 2023's policy included projections of 53%. The most recent land use revisions lop a full 4% off the 12% gap. There's still 8% to go, but hey, what's the rush? There's plenty of time. We can still revise this later. The revisions to land use data means the projected 53% fall in emissions is more like 57% for 2035. The CCA recommends a 65% cut. If you were actually formulating a 2030 target based on fossil-only emissions, it would probably be less than 43%. I'm using Labour's claimed progress here to illustrate what the scale of change looks like based on the figure they promote and brag about. Climate Analytics estimates that a fossil-only 2030 NDC equivalent would be around a 28% cut. What does NDC mean again? Nationally determined contributions. Nationally determined contributions are climate action plans submitted by countries under the Paris Agreement outlining their commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change impacts. Okay, so it's like the national reductions. Climate Analytics estimates that a fossil-only 2030 reduction equivalent would be around a 28% cut, and 1.5 degrees aligned, so 1.5 degrees target aligned would be a 51% cut. Almost every article I read laid the blame for this on communities objecting to transmission lines, wind and solar projects, and not a single one laid the blame at the feet of the government for failing to introduce stronger clean power incentives or at companies who won't act unless it's profitable enough. Clean energy developers argue all they need is for environmental protection laws to be cut and weakened, and the Labour Party is trying, through friendly journalists, to spin the situation as totally fine. That's a jab, right? Am I being psycho? Or is that a jab? Right? Maybe not. Smile? Okay. Alright. That's fun. That's very fun. To be fair, I haven't watched much of his videos about climate change. I would imagine that the opinions are very... I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I think it's unfair of me to presume that the opinions of climate targets are in line with Labour. I would assume, though, that the opinions are in line with Labour's climate targets and not with the science. Someone on Blue Sky pointed out that the LNP sort of reneged on a climate target too. When they came into power, they had agreed to Rudd's 5% by 2020 target, but that was set with a caveat to increase the 2020 target to 15% if an ambitious global agreement was adopted. This was the Copenhagen one. I guess it's technically correct, but sort of doesn't quite feel the same as any one political party walking back their own position. But point taken, mate. In the 2023 progress report, the CCA does mention the calls for a separate target, but extremely explicitly doesn't decide to include this as a recommendation. Merely that the authority will continue to work on these issues. Sure you will. What is the CCA? The Climate Change Authority. Okay. .gov.au. We did it. We read the article. From what I understand in like a retrospective sense, is the Greens Party, when they talk about how Labour have cooked the books, I imagine this is what they're referring to. Right? I've never seen, like, maybe it's because I just don't have the intellectual ability to actually consume the conversation. But I was going to say, I've never seen someone actually outline exactly how Labour or the Liberal Party or the Labour Party, whatever, have cooked the books. But I guess it has taken me like a full-on freaking week of reading articles and watching videos and having ChatGPT to explaining to me like I'm a 5-year-old